it's a bit late, but this is a New Year poem. I've recently started writing a lot of form poems, and I always jeer when people say this is an acrostic. So this is an acrostic. Jeer, by all means. New Year acrostic wishes for 2025. Not asking for much next year, you see. Every year the same old plea. Wars resolved, no floods, no drought. You know, no more to worry about. End of all loneliness, torture, self-harming. And don't get me started on global warming. Renazification, fascism, the UN, sleepless nights and Trump again. Everything passes, however alarming. Viewing the war zones, quoting the politics. End may be nigh, but here's a wish. Let's try and get to 2026. Now, I love those poems from Michelangelo's old age. I've reached that point where I'm trying not to write about it, but it's very tempting.
Embrace it.
And one of the nasty things about old age is that you hear of old boyfriends who've died. Oh. Yeah, well, I do anyway. This is a poem in memory of John Marks, who was actually 2 years younger than me, and he died in 2007. He was a jazz musician. We were 18 and 16 when we met. He was 16. And we were very fond of each other for a long time, but he went off with a jazz singer called Audrey. And I was glad to find out that they did stay together. But he moved to Hamburg with her, and I thought I'd never see him again. But this is what happened, and I can't even remember the exact date. It must have been before 2007. Yes. That's all I know. I was imbued at the time. And it was this poem was inspired by a quote from E. Cummings, who said, "Nobody, not even the rain, has such small hands." I knew it was you. I'd know your little hands anywhere. And he knew me in the paper shop where stands of magazines and books had enticed me in from the rain and blustery streets, that dusty little town beside the sea. My hands leafed through the books, and suddenly at my shoulder his broad freckled fingers light on my arm. And there it was again, the smouldering beginning and the end of my love, my anger, the fighting, the flight. Our lovers waited for us in distant towns. 5 minutes polite chat. We parted as adults do. We knew there was no chance, no second round. Lately I heard he'd died. I grieved as lovers do. And I found him in Wikipedia, believe it or not. That's how I know when he died. However, there we are. Now this is called Traces, and this is another anecdote in a way. I can't even remember when it was. I could well have been a young teenager, and I can't remember who I was with. But this is a little story. Traces. Jet trails scribble stories on a Cornish sky, where cumuli mass above the far-off sea. Abandoned on a windy hilltop, traces of creative life. Exposed among ruins, poems, pictures, pages scattered. We read between the lines, a history in coded images. 2 lives. A history in coded images. 2 lives scattered. We read between the lines. Exposed among ruins, poems, pictures, pages abandoned on a windy hilltop. Traces of creative life where cumuli mass above the far-off sea, jet trails scribble stories on a Cornish sky. And this poem is somewhat about growing old. It's from looking at a particular object in our house, but I know where it came from. Mirror Speaks. Sorry, I've got the wrong version here. Never mind. I made this into a villanelle later, but it isn't at the moment. Here you are, I'm going to read the draft of it. Mirror Speaks. Waiting, always watching, I can't reflect upon myself. Always at the mercy of others' perceptions. The woman who observes me now is reflecting on our shared past and writing notes about me. On a whim, she salvaged me from a life she rejected. She has very few regrets. Once I reflected her mother-in-law alone and mourning her husband and their long marriage. Perhaps one future day I'll briefly hold an image of this woman's death. How long then will it be before my honest silvered glass and my ornate iron frame are consigned to a recycling skip, and I move on to join them in the cosmos, returned back to the elements that created me. Thank you.